You don't need hours on set to know who's in charge. According to Richard Widmark, it only takes 5 minutes to spot a real director. That wasn't arrogance, it was experience. This wasn't just another Hollywood actor talking. Widmark was a titan of the silver screen, a man whose piercing performances left an unforgettable mark on the golden age of cinema. But behind that steely gaze and Hollywood acclaim was a man wrestling with battles few ever saw. Fame didn't shield him from struggle, it exposed him to it. And now, as we peel back the curtain, we uncover the real Widmark, sharp, bold, brutally honest, and totally unfiltered about the stars he refused to tolerate. From the quiet streets of Sunrise, Minnesota to the dazzling spotlight of Hollywood, Richard Widmark's rise to fame was anything but smooth. His journey was carved through grit, talent, and a refusal to back down, no matter how tough the industry got. But what did it really take for this small-town boy to conquer the brutal world of classic cinema? And more importantly, who stood in his way? You're about to find out. Hey everyone, I'm Mr. Heyman, and today we're diving into the untold side of a Hollywood legend, Richard Widmark, as we uncover the 5 actors he openly despised and why. But before we jump into the drama behind the scenes, make sure to hit that subscribe button if you're a fan of classic westerns or love the legends of old Hollywood. We bring you the stories the studios never wanted you to hear. Widmark wasn't born into glamour. His family moved shortly after his birth, settling in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, where his father, Carl Henry Widmark, worked as a traveling salesman. Life wasn't easy, and things only got tougher when his younger brother Donald arrived in 1918. But those early struggles would forge the fire that made Widmark unshakable. The bond between Richard Widmark and his younger brother wasn't just familial, it was unshakable. From a young age, the two were inseparable, navigating life's twists and turns side by side. Richard often spoke fondly of the person who first introduced him to the magic of movies, his Scottish grandmother. A devoted fan of cowboy icon Tom Mix, she took little Richard to the cinema as often as 2 or 3 times a week. It was during those early, wide-eyed afternoons in darkened theaters that a spark ignited, one that would eventually blaze into a lifelong passion for storytelling and performance. Because of his father Carl's traveling sales job, the family moved frequently, never staying rooted for long. But stability finally came when they settled in Princeton, Illinois. Carl purchased a bakery, Henry's Bakery, and the family lived in the apartment above it, a humble yet meaningful home that gave them a sense of belonging. Richard thrived at Princeton High School. He wasn't just a good student, he played football and was elected senior class president. But behind the achievements, life was still complicated. During Richard's junior year, his parents' marriage collapsed. Ethel stayed behind in Princeton to raise her sons alone, giving them the grounding they needed to rise. After graduating in 1932, Richard earned a scholarship to Lake Forest College with dreams of becoming a lawyer. But destiny had other plans. Between football games and speech contests, where he placed 3rd statewide, another stage was quietly calling his name. He also took part in college plays. He was afraid of what people would think if he told them he liked acting, so he didn't. But his love for the stage quickly grew. Meeting Aurora Jean Hazelwood, a theater student who also wants to be an actress, was the most important change in his life. He would love her forever. In 1936, Richard graduated from high school. He was asked to stay at Lake Forest and help with speech and drama lessons. In 1938, he packed his bags and went to New York City on the advice of a friend to try his luck in radio. He stayed there for 2 years. Jean Hazelwood was in New York at the same time to study at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. Richard quickly got parts in radio plays like a Jenny's Real-Life Stories, and his career took off as he rushed from studio to studio. Richard and Jean got married in her city of Evanston, Illinois, on April 5, 1942. This was just a few months after the U.S. joined World War II. Richard always said that after meeting Jean, he never made out with another woman. He once said, "I like my wife a lot." There were no Hollywood scandals during their 55-year marriage. During the war, Richard tried to join the army but was turned down because his eardrum was damaged. At the same time, his brother Donald was called up and sent to Europe. Trump's plane was shot down over the Netherlands in 1943, which was a terrible event. Among his group, he was the only one who made it out alive. He was locked up in a German camp for more than a year. He got home, but his health never got better. He had terrible headaches and was partly paralyzed in 1951. Donald died on December 22, 1955, from a brain tumor. He was only 37 years old. In order to take care of his brother, Richard did everything he could. He often said that the government didn't understand how badly Donald was hurting. In 1943, Richard Widmark and his wife Jean were worried that Donald, Jean's brother, would make it through the war. At the same time, Richard began to build his business. His first show on Broadway was Kiss and Tell, and he then joined the American theater wing to act for American troops. Richard was already making a good living from work on the radio and stage at that point. On July 25, 1945, Richard and Jean's only child, and Heath Widmark, was born. Soon after, Richard got an offer that would change his life from Daryl F. Zanuck, an official at 20th Century Fox. In Kiss of Death, which starred Victor Mature, he was asked to play a violent killer named Tommy Udo. Anne Hathaway, who directed the movie, didn't think Richard was right for the part. He thought Richard's high forehead made him look too smart to be a believable killer. In the end, Zanuck won, and Richard got the job. Hathaway wasn't happy, which made it hard for him to shoot. Richard was only interested in the part because it was in New York. It's hard to believe that this was his first movie. He made a scary impact in the very first scene he ever filmed. He made movie history when, as Tommy Udo, he pushed an old woman in a wheelchair down a flight of stairs and laughed in a way that would go down in movie history as a real scary laugh. There was a Golden Globe for him as the most potential male newcomer, and the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor went to him for that scene. "I thought this acting thing was easy," Richard joked. "Since then, I haven't won anything." He also said that the first time he saw himself on screen, he was terrified and thought about killing himself. But people were hooked. People really dislike his character, and Fox gave him a 7-year deal even though he had signed a bad deal just to get the Tommy Udo part. In 1948, he was in the movie Yellow Sky with Gregory Peck and Baxter. He also played parts in Roadhouse with Celeste Holm and The Street with No Name with Lloyd Nolan and Barbara Lawrence in the same year. In 1949, the next year, he was in Down to the Sea and Ships with Lionel Barrymore. The studio gave him 2 big jobs by 1950. The first was Panic in the Streets, which was directed by Ella Kazan, an old friend from Broadway who had pushed Richard to try out for Kiss of Death in 1947. The movie didn't do well at the box office, even though it had stars like Jack Palance and Zero Mel. This was mostly because it was filmed in New Orleans, which cost a lot of money. Next, Richard was in No Way Out, a thriller with Sidney Poitier and Linda Darnell that was very controversial because of its race themes. Richard didn't want to play the racist Ray Bid. He had to do it because the company made him. Richard would say sorry to Poitier and ask, "Sid, you know this is just acting, right?" after each intense scene. "Dick, I get it," Poitier told him to calm down. "I also work as an actor." They became good friends. One day, Sidney told Richard that he was the first person in Hollywood to ask him to dinner, which meant a lot to him at the time. Let's talk about the video's main subject before we look at the rest of Richard Widmark's life. One of Richard Widmark's roles was in the 1951 movie Halls of Montezuma, which was set on a Japanese-held island during World War II. Along with his old radio friend Carl Malden, Jack Palance, Richard Boone, and a young Robert Wagner, who got his first paid job in this movie, he played lead roles in the movie. In 1952, Widmark was in the movie Don't Bother to Knock with Marilyn Monroe. Richard once said that Marilyn's soul was like a bird that had been hurt. She wanted fame so badly, but everything around her scared her. Lots of the time, she hid in her dressing room for hours. By late afternoon, the crew would beg her to come out so they could go home. She had trouble remembering her lines, and you might have thought her act was a mess while it was being filmed. On the big screen, though, after the movie was cut together, she looked stunning. Rumor had it that Marilyn often slept with her co-stars, but Richard told her, "Not with me." She didn't even flirt. He did more work with Robert Wagner in 1954, this time on Broken Lance with Spencer Tracy. This movie was the last one in Widmark's 7-year deal with 20th Century Fox. He thought it was time for a change at age 40. It was tiring for him to go from one show to the next without stopping. Even more importantly, he thought he could make more money as a freelance actress. Anne, his daughter, said that her dad had always been a family man who liked going home and being quiet. Richard and his family lived on a quiet ranch in the San Fernando Valley at this time. Widmark started his own production company and named it Heath Productions, which is Anne's middle name. He did this because he wanted more artistic freedom. However, 1956 was a sad year for me. His mother, Ethel May, died not long after his brother, Donald. Widmark didn't talk much about his competitors in Hollywood, but over the years, players who worked with him have talked about the ones who annoyed him. Widmark didn't like people who didn't take acting as seriously as he did, whether it was because they were cocky, lazy, or just liked to show off. People who knew him well said there were 5 stars he could never stand, no matter how well known they were. First place goes to Frank Sinatra. People all over the world liked the head of the board, but Richard Widmark didn't like him. In 1968, they worked together on The Detective, which is said to have made Widmark very angry. Sinatra was very careless about his work, he was always late, and he wanted to shoot scenes quickly with little planning. This was the exact opposite of Widmark's professional method. Later, a team member said, Richard thought Frank was all charm and no commitment. Widmark believed that acting was holy. He thought of it as, just another gig. Marlon Brando comes in second. Widmark didn't know how to feel about Brando. He agreed that the younger actor was talented, even brilliant, but he didn't like the way he was behaving. Worst of all, Brando's unpredictable behavior, unwillingness to learn lines, and constant improvising made Widmark very angry. Widmark was once quoted as saying, "Some actors need chaos to create, I prefer focus." This was a subtle jab at Brando that many people thought was aimed right at him. Third place goes to Tony Curtis. The two actors worked together on the 1964 movie The Long Ships, but they were not friends. People knew Curtis as vain, and he often spent more time in the makeup chair than working on his writing. He used the set like a fashion show, but Widmark was ready to get to work. Everyone could feel the tension between them behind the scenes. A worker on the set said Widmark didn't hate Curtis for who he really was, but for what he's supposed to be. Widmark thought that Curtis was more about style than content. Robert Mitchum comes in at number 4. Relaxed, drunk, and known for not caring about anything. It was cool to be Mitchum in Hollywood. But for Widmark, that lack of concern was almost rude. There were times when Mitchum was proud of how little he trained for parts. As one person put it, "I just show up, hit my mark, and say the lines." Widmark saw every job as a battle to be won, and this attitude made him very angry. They were both in movies from the same age, but their ideas couldn't have been more different. Widmark once told a friend, "You don't coast through greatness," after seeing Mitchum on TV. 5. Kirk Douglas. The name on the list that might shock you the most. Both players were tough, intense, and strong, but maybe that was the issue. Too much alike. Widmark believed Douglas was a scene stealer who always tried to make other people look bad. Widmark didn't like his deep voice, over-the-top facial expressions, or need to take over every scene. It was said that Widmark turned down a big part opposite Douglas because there's only room for one storm in a scene, and Kirk brings the whole hurricane. Even though he had personal problems, Richard Widmark kept things business on the outside. He never did things like air his dirty laundry in public or give information to gossip magazines. But people who knew him well say that he thought actors had duties to the public, the script, and each other. If someone made fun of that, whether out of ego or laziness, he took it personally. Richard Widmark, Richard Despised, and June Lockhart all played lead roles in the 1957 movie Time Limit. After only 1 year, he showed up in The Tunnel of Love with Doris Day and Gig Young. He worked with Robert Taylor, Patricia Owens, and others that same year on The Law and Jake Wade. Widmark was already a well-known name and face in Hollywood at that point. He said, "I don't care how well-known an actor is," when someone asked him if his fame had invaded his privacy. He can go about his day if he wants to. Widmark played Jim Bowie in John Wayne's version of The Alamo in 1960. Wayne actually wanted him to play Colonel William Travis at first, not Bowie, which is interesting. He even said to the 5'10" Widmark, "You're not big enough to play Jim Bowie." But Widmark answered with confidence, "I will be." He showed it. The next year, in 1961, Widmark appeared in the Western Two Road with James Stewart and Shirley Jones. He said that director John Ford and Jimmy Stewart were fighting most of the time on set, mostly over Stewart's insistence on wearing an old, worn-out cowboy hat that he had worn in other westerns. Shirley Jones later said that Richard Widmark was the only main man she ever really fell in love with, even though there was tension behind the scenes. "He and Stewart were both so kind and protective of me," she noted. "Though nothing ever came of my feelings, maybe that's why I loved him." In the same year, Widmark also played the American prosecutor at Nuremberg, working with superstars like Spencer Tracy and Burt Lancaster. In 1962, he was in the huge movie How the West Was Won with John Wayne, Jimmy Stewart, Gregory Peck, Debbie Reynolds, Carol Baker, and Henry Fonda, among other big names. The film had a big $15 million finances, however went on to earn the studio over $50 million. By way of 1964, Widmark and his wife Jean were enjoying life on their non-violent 20-acre property in Connecticut. In 1966, he returned to the screen with Alvarez Kelly, a civil battle drama co-starring William Holden and Janice Rule. The subsequent year, he starred Inside the Way West with Robert Mitchum and Kirk Douglas. Sadly, simply 2 years after Alvarez Kelly, Widmark received heartbreaking news. His father Carl had exceeded away in New Orleans at the age of 70. In 1974, Richard Widmark regarded in Homicide at the Orient explicit alongside stars like Lauren Beale and plenty of others. Later in 1982, he acted in Hanky Panky, a movie directed through his friend Sidney Poitier and starred along Gene Wilder and Gilda Radner. With the aid of 1987, at the age of 72, Widmark admitted that film no longer excited him. He stated, "I've realized in my old age that making films simply irritates me. I have only were given a few years left and that I don't want to spend 12 hours on set just to shoot 2 minutes of photos." Throughout his career, Widmark appeared in over 70 movies, some distance too many to listing, but he changed into in particular recognized for his roles in westerns. That equal year, in an interview with Parade Mag, he shared a bizarre tale. A female as soon as slapped him in the road, calling him a touch squirt, even as once more a big guy knocked him proper out of his chair at a restaurant. "This performing enterprise is something else," he laughed. Whilst asked if he turned into clever with cash like a few stars who misplaced all of it, Widmark joked, "No, I'm just cheap." In February 1990, at age 75, he received one in all his maximum honors, the D.W. Griffith Lifetime Fulfillment Award. His longtime pal Sidney Poitier offered it to him. Widmark changed into touched and stated, "Sid, I cannot accept as true with you got here all the way to California just for this." Poitier replied, "For you, Dick, I would have walked." However, that identical year added heartbreak. Richard's liked spouse, Jean, became identified with early-stage Alzheimer's. After her diagnosis, he stepped far away from performing to take care of her full-time. He most effective returned all over again in 1991 for the film Genuine Colorings with John Cusack and Imogene Stubbs just to fulfill a dedication. The following 7 years were deeply painful for Richard and their daughter and as they watched Jean slowly fade away. On March 2, 1997, Jean passed away from Alzheimer's in Santa Barbara, California, leaving at the back of a grieving own family and a husband who had devoted the entirety to her in her final years. Just a few months after Jean passed away, Richard decided to promote their beloved 80-acre ranch in Hidden Valley. Without her, it simply did not feel the same. Then 2.5 years later, on September 27, 1999, Richard, who turned into 84 at the time, married 71-year vintage actress Susan Blanchard, a longtime family pal. Richard as soon as said Susan had usually been kind to John. The couple settled down in Roxbury, Connecticut. In 2002, Richard turned into commemorated with an induction into the countrywide Cowboy Corridor of Repute in Oklahoma town, a proud moment in his later years. But by 2007, his health had started to say no, and a fractured vertebrae simplest made things worse. On March 24, 2008, on the age of 93, Richard Widmark passed away peacefully at his home in Roxbury. Pals remembered him as a gentle and honorable guy, and fittingly he left the sector simply as he had lived, quietly.